These events occurred 2 summers ago in the Grand Teton area. My boyfriend at the time, now husband, let's call him H, was an avid outdoorsman and also served in the military. I was an ecology major and wanted to spend more time outdoors, so he decided to take me on my first backpack, just the 2 of us. For those who aren't familiar, the Grand Tetons are well known for their wildlife, specifically grizzly bears. My only experience with bears up to this point was watching a little black bear cross the road from the safety of my car. Seeing grizzly country signs around every corner wasn't doing much to calm my nerves. The first incident. My boyfriend looked like Indiana Jones, machete hanging from his belt, large knives attached to each side of his pack, bear spray strapped to his waist. You get the picture. The beginning of our 25-mile journey was all uphill. When in bear country, you're supposed to make noise as to not startle the wildlife by accidentally sneaking up on it. As you can imagine, going up a steep hill while carrying a 40-pound pack makes it difficult to make conversation. We were an hour in, and almost at the top of the ascent. I noticed that the woods had gone completely silent, save for the rushing stream that was to our left of the trail. Silent woods are never a good sign. This usually indicates predators nearby. At this point, I was in front of my boyfriend, and we were about to crest the hill. For the past 20 minutes, we had not said a word to each other, having been too tired to speak. We noticed the silence at the same time, and gave each other knowing glances. I came up over the top of the hill, and immediately froze. Sitting not 10 feet in front of me, in the middle of the trail, was a grizzly bear. My husband wasn't aware yet, as he was behind me, so I did the first thing that I could think of. While still in my frozen stance, I managed to take my arm and started flinging it wildly behind me, trying to get my husband's attention. I was too terrified to speak. The bear went from sitting to all fours, not looking away from us once. H quickly swung me around so that I was behind him, and he just started yelling. Being in the military, he knows how to yell. But the grizzly wasn't quite fazed, as it started to walk slowly towards us. At this point, I was on the verge of passing out from terror. The bear was about 5 feet in front of us when we heard a loud crack, coming from the woods to our right. The bear heard it too, and he bolted towards the stream. A second crack boomed again, this time much closer than before. H said, "It's probably just some falling branches," but we both knew that wasn't the case. At this point, we were walking quickly up the trail in an attempt to create some distance from the grizzly bear and those strange noises. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand straight up, and at that same moment, H stopped moving in front of me. He turned around to look at me, and I turned to look behind me. To this day, we are not sure what we saw. Back where we were standing was a large, black or brown mass. It looked to be 3 times bigger than the already large grizzly that we had just seen a few moments before. Its back was facing us, and then it stood on its back legs. It looked similar to a bear, but something about the shape was just off. At this point, it was probably stupid to run away, but that is exactly what we did. We were aware of heavy footsteps behind us, but neither of us looked back. The footsteps eventually faded. At this point, I was a mess. H was doing his best to console me. "Honey, this is extremely unusual. The bears usually stay away from humans. We're going to be okay. I'm sure that it won't happen again." That was enough to convince me to continue on the backpack. Not another hour later though, we had reached a clearing where we decided to take a rest and eat a snack. About a minute after we sat down, I noticed bushes moving in a line towards the clearing, towards us. Out of the brush comes this adolescent grizzly, He looks just as spooked as I'm sure we did, but he came straight for us. H, being the crazy nut that he is, decided to charge back at the bear while screaming, "Bear spray at the ready." That did the trick and the bear ran off. All I could think was, just my luck. But that wasn't even close to what happened the second night. Second night. Before we began our backpack, we had to let the ranger station know which trails or route we plan to take. With this information, they usually send a ranger on horseback at some point during the backpack to check on you to make sure that everything is okay. There were not many approved trails left for us to choose from, and it was just our luck that they were the most difficult. Apparently over the 3 days that we were on those trails, we had been the only hikers. We didn't see a single other person once we were en route. Anyhow, I guess we missed the ranger who came to check on us. We had been following hoof prints the entire second day, and we hadn't seen any the day before. I had some foot problems, so we spent valuable daylight trying to adjust my boot, laces, and socks to compensate for the pain. When we started on the trail again, we had maybe an hour or two left of daylight, and in the woods, it gets dark fast. I was exhausted, and it was now dark out, and H was the only one with a working headlamp, as mine wouldn't even turn on for some reason. We needed to find somewhere to set up camp, and we still needed to eat. It was freezing and the wind was blowing. It was creating a howling sound as it rushed through the trees, which made it difficult to hear or discern any other sounds coming from the woods. After another an hour of hiking through the dark, we found a clearing. Well, it was more like a bowl. It looked to be about 200 meters in diameter, with the sides being 10 meters down from the trail to the bottom of the clearing. This place was strange and we both felt it, though he didn't tell me how freaked out he was till after we had left. There was no moonlight, so all we had was the illumination from his headlamp, our small camp stove, and the flashlight that I had fished from my pack. Half of the trees were dead or fallen, just in the bowl. The vegetation everywhere else was very dense. To help alleviate my anxiousness, he started playing Ninja Sex Party out of his portable speaker. This didn't help much, as it just echoed off the trees, creating a dissonance of sounds. He also thought that it would ward off any predators nearby. This is when we knew our anxiousness wasn't paranoia. The silence was back. There hadn't been a single bird chirp since we had arrived at the clearing. It also may have to do with the obnoxious music, but because of our previous experience, we decided to turn off the music and head into the tent. Also, it was freezing. As soon as we were situated in our sleeping bags, we heard deep cracks and thuds echoing from beyond the tree line. Falling trees, maybe. There had been a lot of wildfires and very little rain this season. And then a thud. We both froze. That sound wasn't an echo. It came from inside the clearing. Definitely not a fallen tree. And then the thud again. It came from right outside our tent. We both stopped breathing. H's hand found mine and we clung to each other, paralyzed. Something dragged across the outside of our tent, making an indent as it went along. It was thin, almost like a finger. "What is it?" I whispered, shaking. "I don't know. It shouldn't be a person. We're the only ones on this side of the mountain." I was trying my hardest to stifle sobs, trying to listen to what was outside. I could hear steps, but I couldn't decipher what it was. The steps stopped, and then the whole side of the tent was slowly pushed inwards. At this point, whatever was outside knew that we were inside, so I shined my flashlight at the side of the tent. What I saw made my blood run cold. It was the shape of a human face pressed into the tent wall. I could make out the nose and an open mouth. Each time they breathed, it made the tent around their mouth billow in and out. H said, "Forget that," and he pulled out a Glock from a sleeping bag. He cocked it, and the sound shattered the silence. The face pulled back, and we heard fast footsteps heading towards the edge of the clearing. We didn't leave the tent until the sun was shining the next morning. The first thing we noticed was the smell of urine. We came out of the tent and we looked around. Whoever it was had peed on our coals that we had left in the fire, leaving a disgusting stench of evaporated pee. Footprints surrounded our tent, circling around multiple times. Muddy handprints decorated the outside of our tent. We think it was mud anyway. Wildlife is not the most dangerous thing in the backcountry. This happened last year in Virginia, and is also the reason that I never backpack alone anymore. I was taking summer courses at the time, and we ended up with a 3-day weekend in June, so I thought it was a great time to go explore some of the Virginian wilderness after all. I did a Google search and found a state park with a trail that looked nice, and I let my roommate and family know that the trail I would be going on. When I got close to the park area, I saw a little outdoor shop where people hiking the Appalachian Trail stopped. I went in to grab a map of the area just in case that I got lost. As I was talking to the owner, he mentioned a trail that's not well known that has a pretty cool waterfall and a swimming hole. This piqued my interest, so I had him show me on the map. It took me outside of the state park, but he said it was a great place to go. I paid for the map and I thanked the owner. I texted my roommate and my parents about the new trail, and I parked my car and I set off on my adventure. I should note that the waterfall was going to be the side trip of my journey. I was planning 3 days and 2 nights. I started on part of the Appalachian Trail, and it was pretty packed with people, and some of them were really fun to talk to. As expected, I got further and further from the main trails and I saw less and less people. Around early afternoon, 3 miles from my destination, I noticed that it was unnaturally silent. No birds, no bugs, not even wind, and I had a feeling of being watched. I shook it off as me overanalyzing the situation. I got to the waterfall and it wasn't too spectacular, but it was cool to look at. Plus it had a good sized area to swim in, so naturally, I stripped down to my skivvies and I took a dip. It was pretty refreshing. As I was getting my clothes back on, I started whistling to myself. But that's when I heard something whistle the same tune back. I thought it was just a bird copying me, so I went back and forth with it, and it would repeat whatever I whistled. I thought it was pretty neat. As I was setting up camp, I couldn't shake this feeling that I was being watched again. Like I would get goosebumps and my hairs would stand up. As night fell, I built a small fire and I lit my jet boil to make dinner. As I did this, I became hyper aware that again, there was no sound, just deafening silence. Some part of my brain was telling me that I was not safe and I needed to leave. But I ignored it and I crawled into my tent with my flashlight and a book. I went to sleep without incident. When I woke up the next morning, my sight was trashed. My camp stool was nowhere to be found. My bear bag with my food was cut down, and the contents were thrown across the site. My first thought was a crafty animal chewed through the rope and got to the bag. But I looked at the rope and it was cut with something very sharp. Plus, none of the food was even touched. I also noticed bear footprints all around my campsite. Keep in mind, I'm at least 6 to 8 miles from the road. As I was looking at the mess, I heard a branch snap off in the distance and I turned to look in that direction. I saw nothing, but I heard that whistling again. My whistle from yesterday. But it sounded different, more sinister. It made my hair stand up on end. And this is when I listened to my instincts and I got the heck out of there. It sounded like it was a little off in the distance, so I packed up my camp as fast as I could. The whistling got closer as I finished stuffing that tent into my bag. I didn't bother with putting anything away properly. The whistling was incessant and sounded like it was coming from all directions. I got fed up with it, so I stood up and I yelled into the woods, "Shut up, and what the heck do you want?" It stopped whistling, and it was quiet for a moment. And then it repeated what I said, in my voice. It sounded just like me but distorted like it came from an old TV. After I heard this, I immediately threw my pack on and I ran the direction that I came. I heard it moving just behind me fast, switching between the whistle and my voice. It felt like it was toying with me, not coming too close but not being too far. Eventually, it sounded like it got further and further away from me, and then it stopped suddenly. When it stopped, I stopped and turned around. I wish I didn't because I heard the most bone-chilling screech ever coming from right next to me. And that's when I started running again. I didn't look, I only ran. Less than half a mile, I ran into a couple that was also backpacking. They saw the look of terror in my face and asked if that was me that screamed, and asked if I was okay. I told them about what happened and they decided not to go down where I just came from. We moved to a more populated trail as quickly as we could. As soon as I got back in my car, I drove to one of the park ranger stations and reported what had happened. Since the site was off park grounds, they told me it wasn't in their jurisdiction but they would send a ranger to investigate. The ranger station's parking lot run right up to the woods, and when I was getting into my Jeep, I heard that same tune coming from the woods just in front of me. I never drove so fast in my life. When I told my roommate why I was back after only one night, all he said was, "Bro, I'm never going camping with you." Last summer, a good friend and I embarked on a backpacking trip through the White Mountain National Forest in New Hampshire. As fairly experienced day hikers, we felt comfortable in the Whites for our inaugural overnight trip. While planning, my buddy Ellis figured that we could hike to a backcountry campsite to make our first wilderness night a little more fun. I wasn't going to disagree. Beautiful views, historic trails, and protected night in the dry river wilderness. I was stoked to say the least. Before any hiking trip, I do a little internet search of the trails or shelters that we will be coming across. Throughout the mid to late 1900s, there were a series of these lean-to ups and downs to dry river wilderness, meant for backpackers or through hikers really looking to escape the crowds in more popular areas of the forest. Though as time went on and the Forest Service had other more pressing matters, many of these shelters were dismantled, except Dry River Shelter No. 3, the last remaining shelter in this wilderness zone. On the morning of our hike, I met Ellis at the trailhead and we set off. The sky was overcast, bringing with it a dense fog throughout the forest. The weather left us with nearly no visibility, so there went our stunning views. At least the trail consisted of prime, technical New England rock scrambling alongside the Ammonoosuc River. Ellis and I made it to the Presidential Ridge, stopping by the Lake of the Clouds. The hut was filled with day hikers, backpackers, and through hikers all socializing together. We were even rewarded with some sun, and a brief glimpse of the dry river valley on the summit of Mountain Moreau, before the fog rolled back in. With dwindling views and a stiff wind, Alice and I hustled below the tree line, down to the Dry River Shelter No. 3, our home for the night. Once we dropped off the ridge into the valley, we entered the wilderness zone where rangers patrolled sparingly. Time to really be alone in the wild. As we trekked into the wilderness, all signs of civilization disappeared, and the trail was densely overgrown. Although it had been raining all week, there were no footprints in the mud either. At least we would have some relaxing isolation, I figured. After about an hour or so of descending, Ellis spotted the lean-to just as our legs were asking for relief. A gorgeous old timber structure with a well-used fire pit alongside a cold mountain river. Pristine camping. As we settled in and explored the site, I found a small, bound notebook nestled into the corner of the structure. On the cover, someone wrote, "Dry River Shelter No. 3. Out of curiosity, I opened it, but found nothing more than a lone, man name scribbled onto the first page and a date. Just your standard camping log. Oddly though, the man signed the book the previous day. We saw no footprints or signs of human or even animal disturbance in the trails or here at the shelter. Rain could wash away tracks, but not all signs of animal life. Something felt off to me. I showed it to Ellis, who found it curious, but thought nothing more of the single name. He convinced me that the man was probably a hiking veteran and a professional at L&T. I bought into Ellis's thoughts on the situation to ease my mind. As the sun set, we started a roaring fire alongside the riverbank. Ellis commented on how quiet the location was, having not seen another soul beyond the chirp of birds since leaving the Crawford path. The silence was eerie, but we figured that city life desensitized us to the wild. The sun was setting in, we grew tired with the darkness. Ellis took the lean-to, and I spent the night in my tent. Sleep came quickly after hiking 8 miles with 20 pounds on my back, but this didn't last for long. A brutally sharp slapping noise woke me up. The only thing I could compare the noise to would be someone swinging a 2x4 into a tree, or snapping a thick branch. I figured it was a bear searching for our food bag, hanging in a tree some 20 to 50 yards away. Nothing out of the ordinary for New Hampshire. Sleep overtook me once again, and I remember waking up to the sun rising over the peaks. I stumbled out of my tent to see Ellis also waking up slowly. As we made our morning oats and coffee, I wandered around the site again to see if I could find the marks the bear had left. But instead, I noticed something odd. The small notebook was open. I swear that I'd put it back where I'd found it, closed in the back corner of the shelter, not open on the floor. Hey Ellis, were you checking out this camp log last night? Nah, I passed out, man. It's not like there's anything to read in it anyways, he responded. You sure? I commented as I bent over to pick it up. The lone hiker's name was not so lonely anymore. At least 20 more names filled the pages. The lone travelers whose name was originally on the first page could now be found several pages deep within the notebook. I tossed it to Ellis, whose face instantly dropped the second his mind registered what was on the page. Great. Now I knew it wasn't just some dehydration delusion of the previous day. Dude, we must have been seeing things last night. There is no way we missed all of those names. How could we? Ellis said. This is when I began to tell Ellis about the slapping noise that I heard during the night. I received nothing other than instant denial. These sounds were not the result of some hooligans or backwards crazies harassing us. Ellis was convinced. Rather sternly, he commented, It's a bear, Jack. It's just a bear. Let's go now. And well, go we did. Ellis led us out of the site and on our way home, not 10 minutes later. A year has passed and I'm still not quite sure what happened during our night at the Dry River Shelter number 3. The memory of seeing a single name written on that front page of the notebook is so crisp in my mind. I couldn't have mistaken it. Could I have mistaken the noises I heard and the new additions to the book? Ellis feels the same way about the whole scenario. What do you think? Could we just have been too dehydrated and delusional? Or were we not welcomed by the New Hampshire wilderness? A few months back, my girlfriend and I were bored hanging around the house, and spontaneously decided to go for a hike. We don't go hiking often, but the idea appealed to both of us. And even though there was only about an hour left of light, we figured we had enough time to enjoy a hike before it got too dark. We quickly filled up our water bottles and put on the best walking shoes that we had, and we were out the door, driving up into the mountains. Around my area, there are many hiking trails, with the variety of trails increasing as you go up into the mountains. We tended to stay around the base of the mountains in the occasional case of us hiking, where most people would still be walking, but we wanted to change things up and progressed further up the mountain road to a trail a friend of mine had mentioned. We kept in mind our time and figured that we could hike for a bit, and simply enjoy the new environment for us, and finish up before it was too late. We arrived at the trailhead and see that there are no cars left along the road where the trail commences, but didn't think much of it due to the time. We still had a good 45 minutes until dark, So we continued on. We start walking down a fairly steep hill that then recoups the elevation at the bottom, with an equally steep hill that you have to ascend. We reach the top and then it's smooth sailing from there. We see a lone coyote off the trail a ways off, and some rabbits, and I made a quip about how those rabbits might need to be careful with that coyote lurking around. She playfully hit me for that one. Approximately less than a mile into the trail, we see a large fallen tree that made a bridge over a dried riverbed, and decided to take a rest and climb around on it and take pictures. We were there for about 10 minutes and then resume hiking. We continue on the trail for a short distance until she hears a rustle in the trees behind us. We stop, mildly spooked due to the assumed size of whatever made that rustling, but continue on, only briefly before she decides she's done, and that we need to head back. It's twilight now, so I agree with her and we turn around and head back to the car. When we made it back to the fallen tree, my shoe had come untied, so I used the trunk to fix my loose laces and look behind us for the first time on the hike. Uncharacteristic of me, but hey, I was having fun, why be paranoid? I see a person that was dressed entirely in black with their hood on, that was a significant distance behind us, walking at a slow, even pace. It wasn't something out of the ordinary, so what if they're wearing black with their hood on? I wear black most of the time and it's cold out. I shouldn't make assumptions. This does trigger me to be more alert, however, and I inform my girlfriend of this person's presence. It's now dusk. We continue on at an intentionally faster pace and go through a winding section of the trail, and I lose sight of the person. When we come around the final bend of the section, I figure they are far behind us and that there's nothing to worry about. Sooner rather than later, the person is behind us again, but much closer, probably 50 feet in comparison to 100 feet before, and we had increased our speed, so this alarmed us. We briskly walk around another bend, and as soon as we come around it, we book it. It seemed to be a natural reaction of both of our parts, as we just started running without a word said to initiate it. We are nearing the trailhead now, with only the hills to deal with. We catch our breaths for a moment, and I turn around again. I see the person seemingly halt a sprint upon noticing me looking back, as if they were trying to uphold the illusion of simply walking. At this point, I shout, "Go!" and we sprint down the hill. What little light was left struggled to make its way through the dense trees surrounding us, and the steep hill proved challenging to run down without a clear path to be seen. We both stumbled down the hill, almost falling multiple times and slamming our feet onto rocks and loose brush, but we didn't fall and we didn't look behind us. We make it to the bottom, but must continue up the initial hill and then we will have made it out. We persevere up the incline and make it back to our car. I briefly breathe in relief as I start my car, heart pounded and adrenaline racing. As I reverse onto the road, the person emerges at the trailhead, apparently breathing heavily. We finally got a glimpse of him. His hood had fallen off his head, exposing his pale complexion and dead eyes that were only illuminated by a single lantern at the start of the trail. He was holding something in his hand, but it was too dark to see, and I was not interested in sticking around to make out the object. I shift into drive and accelerate as fast as my car could muster, leaving him behind in the dust of the empty side of the road. Last year, I was hiking in Virginia. It was a planned 2-day hiking trip, myself and 2 friends. Late into the first day, one of my friends grew ill and decided to turn back. The second friend joined him, just in case it got worse. They told me to go on, and seeing as I had been looking forward to the trip, I did. As evening approached, I came upon a clearing in the forest. On a table surrounded by tools and several cans of spray paint was an elaborate dollhouse. It was large, perhaps 3 feet tall. Its walls and windows were open, as if it had just been built and was drying, That lingering smell of spray paint still hung in the air around it. On the back of the house, a photo had been affixed. It was a family picture, old, perhaps taken in the 80s. Everyone in the picture looked very uncomfortable, like they didn't want to be taking the picture, or they were forced to. Not scared, just very uncomfortable. I left it and continued on so that I might reach my planned campsite by nightfall. The wind had picked up considerably. In the distance, I heard a branch give and fall, crashing to the forest floor, startling me. I found my campsite, but was a bit unnerved by the dollhouse in the middle of nowhere. I realized that I didn't want to camp out in the open where whoever was working on it might stumble upon me. I had one of those little one-person tents that stand just tall enough for a person to lay down in. I set it up behind a thick stand of brush, one side blocked off by a tall stand of rocks. I was glad for this, because not only was I now hidden, but the rocks effectively blocked the heavy winds, which had now turned cold as the frigid air tumbled down from the mountains at night. The sound of the wind churned forest was relaxing, and I think I fell asleep right away. Have you ever been awoken by a loud sound and you're unsure what it was exactly, but some remnant of it echoes in your mind for a moment after waking? That's what happened to me sometime later, in the pitch dark. I had the sensation that someone was near. I listened intently, trying to hear over the wind. I heard a man's voice of somewhere in the distance, harsh, rapid, and then becoming softer. He was too far away for me to discern what he was saying, but close enough that I could hear inflection and cadence. It sounded like a crazy person scolding himself, and then his voice becoming softer, answering. As I listened, his voice grew louder and louder, until I could hear his clumsy footfalls crashing towards me. He walked by where I was camped, just several feet away from the brush that concealed me. By now my eyes had adapted somewhat to the pale moonlight, but I still couldn't make out anything more than a large, massive shape. He was probably about 6'6", heavily built. He was carrying something long beneath his arm. A rolled-up tent, I guessed. He was angrily talking about someone's face and how it haunted him. His voice then became childlike, and his conversation with himself turned to the topic of cheese and crackers. The dude was clearly off his rocker, that or high on something really good. After a moment, he continued on, his voice receding until I could no longer hear him. I slept little that night afterward. At first light, I butted back the way that I came, back to town. I noticed that the dollhouse was not in the clearing when I passed back by. Whoever the stranger was that night, I'm glad that we did not meet. So, a few months ago, I was out hiking with my friend. We live in the mountains of western Maryland, and we were about 6 miles into an 8-mile loop that we have done frequently, when we decided to take some pictures and eat a snack at a summit. This area of the trail had a park, benches and tables, and a parking lot. We were sitting and talking, and I noticed a man just walking around the parking lot alone. He was walking aimlessly and staring at his feet. What confused me is that he was in jeans and a button-down shirt, not exactly hiking attire. We decided to set off in the last 2-mile leg of the loop. This part goes down a hill to the headquarters of the park, and is cut out of the mountain bank. The end of that leg is the parking lot where our car is. You don't have a lot of visibility from the trail and you have to walk single file. I was walking in front and talking to my friend. I turn to look at her and I see the same man right behind her, following at a rudely close distance. I immediately got a gut-wrenching feeling. I noticed that he didn't have any pack or hiking gear, and he wasn't even wearing boots. Something about his eyes really spooked me. So a bit more walking and he continues to fall very close. I say to my friend that I have to tie my shoe, as a reason to step off the trail and let him pass us, in case he is only following closely because he wants to go faster than we are. She immediately catches on to what I'm doing and we pull over. He looks startled, and she says hello politely. He just stares. This is when I notice that he is carrying a stick. As I'm fiddling with my shoe, she stands between us and he passes us. We wait for him to give some distance ahead of us, but he immediately slows down. We wait for a bit longer and he gets up to the furthest part of the trail that has sight lines to us, and he turns around, looking up at us. We decided that something feels too wrong about this guy, and we don't want to have to pass him again. So we turn around and we walk back up the trail towards the park with the tables and parking. A few minutes of walking up the trail, I look back and I see him walking up the trail too. He's following us. I tell my friend to walk faster. We book it up the trail and get to the parking lot area that we were at before. We start to strategize and wait, deciding that we will wait to see if he comes back up the trail to the lot. There are more people around here, so we felt safer after waiting it out. About 20 minutes go by and nothing. We are talking about how that could mean that he kept going on the trail and he is long gone, or is waiting on the trail where it is more deserted. We see a couple come up from the trail where we were, presumably taking the loop in the opposite direction that we are. We approach them and ask if they saw anyone on the trail between this lot and the next. They tell us that they saw a young man sitting on a rock about halfway down. They describe the man who was following us. We explain our interaction with him to his wife, and get into a conversation back and forth about whether or not he was a threat. The husband finally interjects and says, "We need to call a ranger. He wasn't just sitting there. He had a knife and was carving that stick." Needless to say, we called a ranger. The nice couple walked that last leg with us to make sure that we got to our car safely, and then even gave us their numbers in case we needed anything. The rangers then walked the trail, but there was no sight of him. I wish I knew where he went and what happened to him, but I'm glad to know that my instincts are legitimate. So, creepy knife-carrying man in the woods. Let's not meet. So, it's the summer of 2013. I'm 21 and I just finished my junior year in college. The second week of August, a group of my friends and I go on an 8-day camping trip. It's 7 of us in total, 4 guys and 3 girls. We're camping in a semi-remote campground in the White Mountains of New Hampshire. It was a large campground, but very few other campers were there. There were a few filled sites near the front of the campground, but we purposely requested a site off in the back corner. We were completely by ourselves. During the trip, we planned a whitewater rafting trip for one of the days. We were hiking Mount Washington towards the end of the trip, and thought maybe we would do 1 to 2 other small hikes, with 1 to 2 days of just chilling by the lake at the campground. We also planned on doing plenty of drinking during the evenings. The first couple of days during the trip were fantastic. Whitewater rafting was a blast, everything is going great. And so, it's the evening of our 3rd day. We have a roaring fire going. We're all just hanging out at the campsite, drinking and messing around. It's around 9:30 when a disheveled looking man walks past our site. His clothes are kind of torn and worn out. He had messy, tangled hair, etc. He looked maybe to be in his mid-40s. This wasn't weird though. We all just think that he's another camper doing a late evening stroll around the campground. Around an hour and a half later, we see the same man past our site in the same direction, but this time he's walking slower, almost with a bit of a limp. We're all pretty drunk at this point. I think one of us might have yelled something out to him, but he just ignored us and keeps walking. Mildly strange, but still, it's probably just someone who wanted to take a long walk. We wrap up the night at around 1:30 or 2. The fire is dying down and we head back to our tents. I usually love sleeping while camping. I usually find it extremely peaceful, but for some reason, I was having trouble sleeping this night. I get up to take a piss in the woods, and when I do, I see a faint light maybe about 50 to 75 yards ahead of me in the woods. It looks like a dim flashlight or something similar. I decide that I want to investigate. I go back to the tent. One of my other buddies is still awake, so I tell him about it. We get up to investigate, and when we do, the light is no longer on. Feeling a little unnerved, I shine my flashlight around the woods a bit, but don't see anything, so I decide maybe my eyes were playing a trick on me. Before and I head back to bed. Sometime later that night, I wake up to a terrifying scream. It was Sarah, one of the girls that we were camping with. I jump out of my tent as quickly as possible, and nearly run into her as she's running back into our site. She's still screaming. She screams that there's a man standing in the middle of the woods. Now our whole party is awake and freaking the heck out. I try to calm Sarah down enough to get her to explain what actually happened. She says that she went to pee in the woods and saw the man from earlier just standing about 15 feet from her, not moving like a statue. We're all freaking out, yelling, screaming, making a giant commotion. I'm internally freaking out too, but try to calm everyone down enough so we can actually do something. We obviously decide to get the heck out of there. We frantically take down our tents, basically just ripping the poles out and throwing everything into the back of our cars, and then we sped out of there. It's around 4 a.m. We're in 2 separate cars and decide to just drive away from the campsite and try to clear our heads. Eventually at around 5:30, we find a small diner that's open and decide to head in for some breakfast. We all have different theories about what the heck just happened. Some of us think that we just ran into a homeless guy who was camping out in the woods and was surprised by us. Some of the girls think maybe he was purposefully stalking us. Either way, none of us are comfortable staying at that campground again. I head back to the front desk of the campground with 2 of the other guys. We explain what happened, and the guys at the front desk actually seemed to believe us, but said that there was definitely no other campers currently that fit the description of the guy. They were insanely nice about it though, and actually refunded most of the remainder of our stay, which astonished me. As a group, we decided that, forget it, we weren't letting one freaky guy ruin our trip. We find another campground a good ways away to stay in. Fast forward 2 days, we're hiking Mount Washington. We get up really early and get to the mountain at around 7:30 to start hiking up. We're a little over halfway up the mountain when we see the very same guy hiking down, though this time he looks much better. His hair isn't crazy. His hiking clothes are relatively clean. We're all just frozen. A few of us let out a surprised scream. He just strolls past us with a massive grin. Luckily, there are enough hikers nearby that nothing could really happen. We decide to continue hiking up anyways, since he was headed in the opposite direction, and hope that we just never encounter him again. We did finish the hike and luckily didn't see him. After that, we did decide to cut the trip a couple of days short. Looking back on it, we've all come to the conclusion that we were likely being stalked in some way. If it was just some homeless guy in the woods near the campground, what the heck was he doing hiking down Mount Washington a couple days later? It was a pretty unnerving and bizarre experience for sure.